It was one of those rare October nights where the air already felt like winter. A sharp, cold wind swept through the neighborhood, carrying the faint scent of snow before the flakes even started falling. Most kids had already given up on trick-or-treating because of the early snowstorm, but I wasn't about to let a little weather ruin my Halloween. My friends had all bowed out, parents too strict, too worried, but I convinced myself I could handle it alone. I layered on a thick jacket, boots, gloves, and my mask, the kind that covered half my face. The streets were nearly empty when I stepped outside, the snow crunching under my boots with every careful step. The few houses with lights on seemed strangely distant, almost inviting, but the shadows the trees cast across the sidewalks made everything feel off-kilter. The wind howled, and the snow blurred the edges of everything, turning the familiar neighborhood into something unrecognizable. About halfway down the street, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A tall figure was standing near the edge of someone's driveway, motionless, frozen in place as if the snow itself had held him there. I froze too, heart hammering, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. The mask he wore was grotesque, not cartoonish like the ones most kids wore. It was pale, cracked, and almost human-looking, with long black strands of hair falling over the shoulders. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared in my direction. I forced myself to continue walking, telling myself it was just a neighbor in costume. But then I saw him again, a few streets over, another block down, and there he was. Same distance, same posture, same mask. My stomach dropped. This wasn't random. He was following me. Panic pressed down like a physical weight, and my pace quickened, boots slipping in the snow as I darted down alleys and side streets. Every time I glanced back, I saw that same still figure, somehow always in view, keeping pace from a distance I couldn't bridge. I tried calling my friends, but the signal was weak, and my voice barely rose above the wind. The snowstorm was isolating me, and the neighborhood had gone silent, except for the crunch of my own steps. I ducked behind a large oak tree, pressed my back to the rough bark, and waited, holding my breath. The figure didn't move. He didn't seem concerned that I had hidden. He just waited. And as the minutes passed, I realized something far more chilling. He didn't need to chase me. He didn't need to run. He was patient, and whatever he planned, he would let me walk right into it. Eventually, my courage, or maybe my fear of staying put, got the better of me. I ran the rest of the way home, snow whipping at my face, branches scratching at my jacket. When I reached my front door, I slammed it shut and locked it, heart pounding in my chest. The familiar walls of my house should have been comforting, but the wind howling through the eaves, combined with the knowledge that someone had been tracking me, made the place feel like a trap. I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents what had happened. Who would believe me? I sat on the couch, shivering, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Minutes passed, and eventually, I started to believe he might have given up. Maybe the snowstorm had finally forced him to retreat. Maybe this was over. But then, just as I relaxed slightly, the doorbell rang. One sharp, single ring that sliced through the muffled sound of the storm outside. My heart leapt into my throat. No one should be out in weather like this. I crept toward the door, staying just out of sight of the small window. Peeking through, I froze. There he was, the tall figure, the cracked mask, the black hair hanging over his shoulders. He was standing perfectly still, just staring at the door, as if he could see through it. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling, and backed away. My parents, oblivious, called for whoever was there to leave candy. He didn't move, he didn't speak, After what felt like an eternity, he simply turned and vanished into the blizzard. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor. Trying to make sense of what had just happened, I never saw him again, at least not physically. But every time it snows heavily in the weeks after that night, I swear I feel eyes on me, a presence lingering just at the edge of my vision. I double-check locks. I glance nervously out the windows, and I feel that same cold dread I felt that Halloween night. I don't know what he wanted, or why he chose me, or how he knew I would be alone. All I know is that the image of that cracked, expressionless mask is burned into my mind, and I will never forget the feeling of being watched in the snow. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the snow drifts across the street, I swear I can see a shadow at the edge of my driveway, waiting, silent, patient. I thought a weekend alone at the cabin would be the perfect escape from the city's chaos. Tucked deep in the forest and perched on the edge of a still, dark lake, it had always been my retreat, a place where I could forget deadlines, notifications, and everything that screamed for my attention. The first day was peaceful, unpacking, setting up a small fire outside, and watching the sunset ripple across the water. The forest seemed alive, but in a calm, welcoming way. Then, just as the last light disappeared behind the trees, I noticed a figure moving along the edge of the woods. At first, I assumed it was another hiker, or maybe someone renting a nearby cabin. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just moved slowly and deliberately, almost like he was pacing. My stomach twisted, but I told myself it was nothing. People wandered around these woods all the time. Night fell, and the cabin's isolation suddenly felt heavier. I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, then tried to shake off the creeping unease. That's when I heard it, a voice calling from the back of the cabin, "Hello? Anyone there?" At first, I froze, thinking it was a joke, maybe someone trying to scare me. But then came the knock, sharp, urgent, insistent. My heart pounded as I tiptoed to the hallway, peering around the corner. Standing there, barely visible in the dim light, was a man. His clothes were torn, dirty, and his face, I couldn't make it out fully, but his eyes, wild, desperate, stuck in my mind like a burning coal. "Please let me in," he hissed, his voice shaking with anger or madness. I couldn't tell. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to call for help, but the signal here was spotty at best. I retreated to the bedroom, locking the door, hoping he'd leave. The pounding didn't stop. It escalated. The man's hands slammed against the walls, then the glass of the window. I could hear a sickening crack as the pane splintered beneath his blows, droplets of red seeping onto the sill. Fear wrapped around me like ice, and I barely breathed until the noise stopped. For a moment, I dared to hope he had gone, but somewhere deep in the forest, I knew he hadn't. The rest of the night passed in agonizing tension. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made my chest tighten. I kept the curtains drawn, lights on, and phone in hand, ready to call the authorities at the slightest movement. Hours felt like days, until the distant wail of sirens finally cut through the darkness. Relief surged through me as I opened the door slightly for the officer, but the man was gone. The snow, lightly dusting the ground, was undisturbed except for one trail that led away from the cabin. What stayed with me wasn't just the fear, but the sheer audacity of it. Someone had watched me, followed me, and somehow known exactly where I was. The cracked window, the blood, the hollow, unblinking stare. It felt like he had been inside my thoughts before he even arrived. The officer said they'd searched the area, but it was a remote place. Who knows if they ever even found him. The next morning, I couldn't linger. Every shadow in the trees seemed to twitch. Every reflection in the lake's surface seemed alive. I packed quickly, every sound amplified in my ears. The forest, once comforting, felt like a predator now, hiding behind the trees, waiting. The drive back to the city was silent, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I haven't gone back since. Even thinking about that weekend sends chills down my spine. I replay the night constantly, the way he moved, how he seemed to anticipate every decision I made, the anger and desperation in his voice. Was it madness or something far worse? I'll never know. Some nights, I still hear the faint tapping in my dreams, the same rhythm of urgent knocks against a locked door, and every time, my heart races the same way it did that night at the cabin, alone with someone who shouldn't have been able to find me, but did. I had been looking forward to a quiet Halloween at home. The night was cold, and heavy snow had blanketed the streets, keeping most kids indoors. I was curled up on the couch, sipping hot chocolate and watching old horror movies, when I noticed the front door swinging slightly in the wind. I had locked it earlier, or at least I thought I had, but maybe I hadn't done it properly. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the gusts of wind. Hours passed, and the snow continued falling, thick and relentless. Eventually, fatigue crept in, and I decided to finish some dishes before heading to bed. That's when I heard it, a soft creak from above. At first I froze, listening intently. It sounded just like a door slowly opening. I laughed nervously to myself, thinking I was letting the Halloween movies get to me, but the feeling of unease stayed, prickling at the back of my neck. After cleaning up, I turned off the lights and headed upstairs. My bedroom door was closed, but as I approached, I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I hadn't left it open. Slowly, I inched closer, trying to convince myself there was nothing there. Peeking inside, it was empty. The house was quiet, except for the muffled wind outside. I locked my bedroom door, but as I did, a shadow flickered across the bottom of it. Someone, or something, was standing right outside. I froze, my breath shallow, praying it would just go away. Minutes passed like hours. I wanted to call the police, but the idea of alerting whoever or whatever was out there terrified me. The shadow lingered, just under the door, unmoving. Then the doorknob began to slowly turn, clicking against the lock. I swallowed hard, keeping perfectly still, hoping it would leave after what felt like forever. The movement stopped. I waited in silence, too afraid to breathe loudly, too afraid to move. Eventually, I convinced myself the intruder had left, or at least, I hope so. I waited in my bed, eyes fixed on the bedroom door. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. I could feel the weight of someone's presence, even if I couldn't see them. Hours passed slowly, the snowstorm outside muffling any distant sounds. Finally, I summoned the courage to peek out into the hallway. Nothing, just the empty hallway, silent and cold. I called the police, whispering to make sure I didn't alert anyone hiding nearby. They arrived quickly, sweeping the house from top to bottom. Nothing. No footprints in the snow around the house. No signs of forced entry. Nothing except the lingering dread I couldn't shake. Even after the officers left, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise, the wind rattling the windows, or the snow sliding off the roof made me jump. I kept checking the locks, staring out the windows into the dark, snow-covered yard. It was impossible to tell if anyone had really been inside or if my mind had imagined everything. But the shadow under the door, that was real. I couldn't explain it, and I knew I wouldn't be able to forget it anytime soon. Days later, the sense of being watched lingered. I avoided going upstairs alone, leaving doors open when I needed to move through the house. It was exhausting, living like that in my own home. And even now, months later, every Halloween, I double-check the doors, the locks, the closets. Every shadow feels like it could be someone standing there, waiting for me to let my guard down. I never saw the intruder's face, never found out who or what it was, but I knew one thing. That night, I was not alone, and I probably never will be, not fully, in my own home.